Carl Jung discovered something terrifying about empaths. They aren't just sensitive souls, they're targets. Narcissists and unstable personalities hunt them like energy parasites, feeding on their light so quietly they never notice it vanish until it's too late. And Jung found a hidden way to cut it off without killing your empathy. A method so unsettling, he only hinted at it in his private notes. Stay with this, because understanding it could change how you see every connection in your life. Jung noticed a disturbing pattern. His most emotionally perceptive patients weren't thriving from their sensitivity. They were deteriorating because of it. They arrived in his clinic depleted, confused, full of guilt for being too much or too emotional, yet strangely entangled with people who seemed to grow stronger the weaker they became. Over decades, he realized this wasn't bad luck or coincidence. It was a psychological predator-prey dynamic. The empath gives energy, the parasite consumes it, and neither sees it happening. Here's the disturbing part. The most dangerous ones rarely look dangerous. They appear as fragile, misunderstood, even deeply wounded souls, and that's exactly what pulls the empath in. Jung warned that this is where the trap begins. Because when your instinct is to heal pain, you don't notice when someone starts surviving on your healing like oxygen. You may know this pattern without naming it. A friend who constantly spirals into crisis, then disappears when you need them. A partner who needs endless reassurance, yet questions your loyalty the moment you breathe. A family member who rewrites every boundary as betrayal. You tell yourself you're helping, but if you look closely, they're not improving, and you're running on fumes. This is the psychological trick. Their nervous system quietly learns to outsource regulation to yours. Jung described it as participation mystique, an unconscious fusion where your psyche becomes the container for theirs. You absorb their chaos, calm their storms, even carry their guilt, until your identity erodes. You stop noticing what you need. You only notice what they might need next. And because it masquerades as love or duty, you don't see the cost until it's catastrophic. Jung saw this erosion break people from the inside. Empaths who once overflowed with clarity and warmth became hollow, anxious shells, performing care while secretly numb. That numbness is not weakness, it's the psyche's emergency brake. Your unconscious tries to protect you by shutting down feelings entirely. But here's the hidden danger. If you stay in this role long enough, your shadow revolts. You start suppressing anger until it mutates into shame. You smile while secretly wishing to vanish. You say, "I'm fine," while something deep inside is quietly dying. This is the silent death Jung warned about. The slow disintegration of the self through forced compassion, and yet there's a way out. Jung found that when an empath stops fueling this dynamic, something alchemical happens. Not by becoming cold or cruel, but by reclaiming the part of you that was taught to disappear. We're going to get to that, because first, you need to see exactly how the feeding works, the hidden mechanism that makes it feel personal, inevitable, and impossible to escape. Jung eventually saw a disturbing pattern most people miss. The feeding doesn't happen through dramatic abuse or open attacks. It happens through psychic enmeshment, when two psyches unconsciously fuse and only one gets to stay whole. To the empath, it looks like compassion. To the parasite, it's survival. Jung called this the participation mystique, a state where identity blurs and emotions stop belonging to just one person. When you enter this state, your nervous system starts doing double duty, regulating your feelings while secretly regulating theirs. You calm their storms before they erupt. You carry their shame before they admit it exists. You become their emotional spine. At first, it feels like connection, even intimacy. But that's the trap. Because every time you soothe their chaos, you teach their psyche it doesn't need to develop its own structure. Jung saw this play out repeatedly. Emotionally unstable personalities unconsciously offload their inner chaos into empathic ones. The empath absorbs it, metabolizes it, and returns harmony, while eroding piece by piece. Here's the cruel paradox. The better you are at empathizing, the more invisible the drain becomes. They cry and you feel it as your own grief. They rage and you flinch as if you caused it. They spiral and you reorganize your life to stabilize them, and in the process, you forget who you were before they arrived. Jung warned this dynamic doesn't stay psychological. It becomes somatic. The empath starts experiencing symptoms that aren't theirs: exhaustion, brain fog, insomnia, emotional numbness, even chronic pain. Their psyche is screaming, "I am carrying two people's lives," and the body begins to break under the weight. But what makes this terrifying is that the parasite rarely knows what they're doing. They don't plot to drain you. Their unconscious simply senses your light as fuel and latches on. This is why you can't reason them out of it, can't explain the harm and hope they stop. Jung was clear. You cannot heal someone who survives by feeding on you. Here's the detail most people miss. The parasite doesn't just want your care. They want your certainty, your sense of direction, your grounded nervous system, your belief in meaning. They crave it because they have none. When you stand near them, they feel real. When you leave, they collapse back into the void they're trying to escape. And that void will do anything to pull you back in. If this sounds familiar, don't panic. Because Jung discovered something powerful. When you stop supplying energy, the feeding mechanism collapses. The parasite loses its grip, not because you fight them, but because there's nothing left to hook into. But doing that requires a shift most empaths resist. The shift from emotional sponge to sovereign boundary. Stay with this, because next we'll break down how to dismantle the hook, the exact psychological lever that severs the feeding bond without turning cold or cruel. This is the point where empaths stop being prey and start becoming untouchable. Jung warned that once the feeding pattern forms, it locks in through a single psychological hook. Your identity becomes tied to their survival. This is the real trap, not their chaos, not their need. It's the quiet belief that without you, they'll collapse. And that makes walking away feel like murder. Jung saw this again and again, empaths who knew they were being drained but couldn't detach because their entire sense of worth had fused with being the one who saves. He called this the complex of the healer, an unconscious role that begins as compassion but mutates into self-erasure. You stop asking, "Is this healthy for me?" and start asking, "What will happen to them if I stop?" That question keeps you chained, because if they fall apart, it proves your worth. And if they survive without you, it feels like you were never needed. Here's the brutal truth Jung emphasized. As long as your self-worth depends on being needed, you will unconsciously choose relationships that need you to stay broken. This is the invisible contract that keeps the feeding alive. You see it in patterns. The friend who always finds a new crisis the second you try to leave. The partner who becomes affectionate only when you're exhausted. The parent who praises your sacrifices but punishes your independence. They aren't planning this. Their nervous system just knows. If you wake up, they lose their power source. Breaking it requires something empaths fear most. Disappointing someone, not cruelly, not vindictively, just choosing to be whole, even if it shatters the role they cast you in. Jung saw that the moment an empath stops cushioning everyone else's reality, something profound happens. The parasite's illusion collapses. They can no longer use your energy to hold their world together. At first, they'll escalate. Guilt, panic, rage, anything to pull you back into orbit. Expect it. This is their psyche flailing as the power source goes dark, but if you hold steady, their hooks can't latch onto anything. Jung described it as withdrawing your projection, reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away to keep them alive. To break this, you have to sit in the tension of being misunderstood. You have to watch them accuse you of being cold while you're finally being real. This is where most empaths crumble. They confuse someone's disappointment with evidence that they've become cruel. Jung warned, that confusion is the last lock on the cage. You do this by asking one question that cuts through the fog. Am I helping them heal or just preventing them from crashing? If it's the latter, you are not healing them, you're absorbing their consequences. That's not empathy, that's self-abandonment dressed as love. And here's the shift Jung found. Once an empath breaks this identity hook, their nervous system recalibrates. Energy returns, boundaries become instinctive. You stop absorbing emotions like a sponge and start reflecting them like a mirror. Clear, steady, untouchable. Stay with this, because next we go into the transformation Jung called the alchemical reversal, when the empath's buried shadow rises and the entire power dynamic flips. This is the point where the hunted become sovereign, and the parasites can no longer find you at all. Jung described a rare transformation he called the alchemical reversal, the moment when an empath stops being a vessel for other people's chaos and becomes sovereign. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside, no explosions, no revenge arcs. But inside, it's seismic. Everything you've buried to keep the peace comes surging back, and for the first time, it doesn't terrify you, it strengthens you. For years, empaths survive by amputating parts of themselves: anger, boundaries, ambition, even joy. They lock these parts away in the shadow to avoid upsetting anyone. Jung warned this is why they become prey. They show light but hide power, and predators instinctively sense that imbalance. When the reversal begins, the shadow stops staying quiet. You feel flashes of anger you used to swallow, instincts you used to override, truths you used to soften. Most empaths think this means they're becoming cruel. Jung saw the opposite. This is the psyche reclaiming its full spectrum. The parts that once protected you are coming back online. It feels disorienting. You speak and people flinch. You stop apologizing and they accuse you of changing. What they're really seeing is power. Not dominance, not aggression, just power finally allowed to exist. Jung said this is what happens when the psyche stops leaking energy outward and begins circulating it inward again. This is the paradox. The same sensitivity that made you a target becomes precision when combined with shadow. You still feel everything, but you no longer collapse under it. Instead of absorbing people's chaos, you read it with surgical clarity and let it pass through. Neurologically, when the shadow integrates, your nervous system shifts from hyper-attunement to grounded attunement. You stop scanning for danger every second and start trusting your internal signals again. That's why manipulators suddenly feel obvious. Their tactics don't change, your threshold does. Jung wrote that this stage often feels like watching the soul change temperature. One moment you're still cushioning everyone, the next you're not, and nothing shatters. You stop cushioning others from the impact of your truth. You speak with stillness instead of apology. People who once fed on your energy lose interest, not because you fight them, but because they can't find the old openings. Be warned, this phase is lonely at first. The ones who depended on your constant soothing will call it selfishness. They will try to pull you back into the old script where you existed for their stability. Don't take the bait. Their collapse is not proof you've become cold. It's proof you've stopped being their battery. And something extraordinary happens here. The parasites stop seeing you. Jung called this individuation, becoming a complete psychological system in yourself. You no longer broadcast the unconscious signal that says, "I will carry you." That silence repels predators and draws equals. Stay with this, because next we'll reach the final shift. How to hold this new power without losing your empathy. How to stay open-hearted while becoming untouchable. Jung warned that when empaths finally break free from energy parasites, the greatest danger comes after the escape, the temptation to kill their empathy to stay safe. It's understandable. After years of being drained, the idea of feeling nothing seems like freedom. But numbness isn't freedom, it's a cage built from fear. Jung taught that real power isn't cold, it's self-contained. Empathy becomes dangerous when it leaks outward without boundaries. But when rooted in a solid sense of self, it becomes precision instead of sacrifice. You stop being a sponge and start becoming a mirror, clear, reflective, untouched. This is the hidden stage most never reach. They think cutting everyone off will protect them, but it only isolates them with their own unhealed shadow. Jung called this the danger of negative inflation. When the ego tries to defend itself by becoming emotionally stone, it looks strong, but it's just fear wearing armor. True sovereignty works differently. It's quiet. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop defending your worth. You no longer rush to fix every storm around you, yet your presence still calms rooms because it carries no hidden agenda. That's real power. Energy that radiates but doesn't leak. Here's how you hold it. You begin each connection by asking, does this require me to shrink? If the answer is yes, you walk, not with drama, with clarity. Jung believed this was the clearest sign of individuation, when your selfhood is no longer negotiable. You also stop personalizing other people's chaos. This is crucial. Parasites only fed on you because you believed their suffering was your fault. Now, you see it for what it is, unprocessed shadow they must face themselves. Your compassion remains, but it no longer becomes currency. And something profound happens here. Empathy becomes stronger, not weaker. Because it's no longer driven by guilt. You can sit with someone's pain without needing to erase it. You can care without carrying. This is what Jung meant by becoming a whole system unto oneself. People will notice the shift even if they can't name it. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're distant. What they're really seeing is that you are no longer available to be consumed. That your light is no longer for sale. And here's the paradox Jung loved most. The moment you stop trying to save everyone, the right people finally appear. Those who don't want your energy, only your presence. That's when you know you've made the full transformation, because now you are still deeply empathic, but you are untouchable.